An Introduction to HTML5. Welcome to the HTML5 Essential Training Series. I'm Mike King of On Target HTML5 and I'll be the instructor for this lesson. So in this course we're going to explore the essential knowledge needed to effectively develop an HTML website. So how you would actually design and develop your HTML website. It's highly recommended you complete the training in the order of the lessons because each lesson is going to build on itself. So if you go through the lessons in the order that they're presented, you'll actually build on that knowledge of HTML and help you learn the material a little bit faster, a little better. I've structured the training as a group of building blocks. So again, one lesson will build on the other. And of course, I've named the lessons with the scope that particular lesson covers. So in the event you need to go back and review, you should be able to just go right back to that lesson title and review the material that you're looking to review. So in an introduction to HTML5, HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language, is used to define the content and structure of a web page. The code for an entire web page is called an HTML document. There are numerous types of tags that make up the structure of an HTML document, and as you progress through this training, you'll become very familiar with those tags. In this course, we'll explore the core knowledge needed to effectively develop websites. As you work your way through this training, you'll find that website development is not near as complex as many people lead you to believe. And in fact, the basic knowledge is quite simple. You will write your very first web page before we complete this lesson. You'll actually write a working web page. A couple of things that you need to be aware of and a couple of things you need to have available to you. First thing, you're going to need a WAMP or a MAMP server depending upon what PC you're working on. If you're working on a Macintosh, you're going to want to install a MAMP server. I actually have the instructions under the tools portion of the website as to how to install a WAMP or MAMP server. You're going to need that up and running to do our demonstrations. You're also going to need a good text editor. In the tool section of the website, I actually review quite a few different text editors that are available both for the Macintosh and for the PC. You'll notice as I'm going through the demonstrations, I'm going to use Sublime Text 2 mainly. That's the text editor that I've been using for many, many years. I actually like it. It's not a free text editor, but it has a lot of functionality for a lot of the different things that I do. I also occasionally use Dreamweaver, or I'll use Notepad. Another good one for Mac is TextMate. But again, if you go to the tools section of the website, there is a tutorial on different text editors and different tools that are available, both free and paid, for developing your web pages. The most important thing you're going to need is a willingness to learn. You really have to put the time and effort into learning this technology if you want to become good at it. It's not hard. There's a lot of cool things that you can do with websites. It's actually quite an interesting way to make a living. But unless you have a willingness to learn it, you're not going to learn it well. So you need to have that willingness to learn. So let's talk a little bit about HTML5. Alright, so what is HTML5? HTML5 is a markup language used for structuring and presenting content for the World Wide Web. It's the fifth revision or fifth generation of the HTML standard that was created in 1990 and standardizes HTML4 as of 1997. In December of 2012, HTML5 became a candidate for recommendation of the WW3C Consortium, which is actually the standards body for the web. In particular, HTML5 adds many new syntactic features that were not currently available in HTML4 into the tag language. These include new video, audio, and canvas elements, as well as the integration of scalable vector graphics content that replaces the user of generic object tags, and the MathML for mathematical formulas. None of that was available in previous versions of HTML. It's now become available in HTML5. These features are designed to make it easy to include and handle multimedia and graphical content on the web without having to resort to proprietary plugins and APIs. And that was one of the bigger complaints with HTML4, is that in order to do video, because video is becoming very, very popular on the web, you needed plugins. You needed, in fact, most people use the Flash plugin because Flash video was so popular on the web. But those plugins had to be licensed. There was costs associated with that stuff for our browser developers. There was costs associated with it if you wanted to write to those standards. I knew that. I mean, ran a Flash website for many, many years teaching people how to develop in Flash. And in order to do that, I mean, I had to be licensed on all that proprietary software in order to teach those classes. Anyone that was designing Flash video was doing the same thing I was doing. They were paying a lot of money to have that software available in order to develop. HTML5 is getting away from that. They're going to allow you to include video, audio, and canvas elements with the tags part of the actual HTML5 scripting language, so plugins will no longer be needed. Other new elements such as sections, articles, headers, nav are designed to enrich the semantic content of documents. In the old days of HTML, if we wanted to put together a section, we used what we call div tags. We actually broke our document into divisions using div tags and then gave those div tags unique IDs or classes so they could be referred to in CSS. HTML5 now includes tags for sections, articles, asides, headers, and navigation that are specifically for that. It makes the web pages much better as far as searchability, much better for search engine optimization. It makes it the indexing of pages much more efficient. There's just a whole lot of advantages to going down this road. New attributes have been introduced for the same purpose, while some elements and attributes have been removed. Some elements, such as the A tag, the site, and menu, have been changed. They've been redefined and standardized across the different browsers. The APIs and the Document Object Model, or DOM, are no longer afterthoughts, but are fundamental parts of the HTML5 specification. Now, unless you've been around HTML development for many years, some of this stuff is not going to make a lot of sense to you, but the important thing to take away from this introduction is HTML5 is making it easier for us as developers to develop websites that not only are going to be much more user-friendly, much more interactive, they're going to be much easier to optimize for search engines. They're going to be much easier to optimize for indexing. HTML5 also defines in some detail the required processing for invalid documents so that syntax errors will be treated uniformly across all conforming browsers and all other agents. And again, anyone that's been around the HTML5 development community for a while knows the differences between browsers has always driven us crazy. I mean, if you've written websites like I have for the past 20 years, you're constantly writing to different browsers because different browsers require different specifications. HTML5 is trying to standardize everything. And in fact, in 2014, the standardization body will be standardizing HTML5, or that's the target date, so that we do have standards now for the HTML development community. So with that said, let's go ahead and demonstrate a simple HTML5 web page to get you started, because as I told you when we first kicked this lesson off, you're actually going to write your first web page in this lesson. So let's go ahead and put together our basic HTML5 web page. Okay, welcome back. So the first thing I want you to notice, this is the desktop. As we go through the tutorials on Target HTML5, you're going to notice this is going to be the display that you're normally going to be seeing. This is the desktop that you'll see with most of my tutorials. I tend to do split screen tutorials, and what I mean by that is you'll notice as we're going through the tutorials that on the left hand side of my screen I'm going to have a web browser up, and on the right side of my screen I'm normally going to have my text editor. Sometimes I'll have them split evenly between the two so I can jump back and forth, and other times I'm just going to have them as so that I can just click to make each one active as we're changing things, this way you can see it happening as it's occurring. Something else I just want you to notice, I've got my XAMPP control panel. The XAMPP control panel is my MAMP, in this case my WAMP server, that is running in the background. You'll notice I've got my Apache server running with MySQL. Throughout some of the tutorials you're going to notice that we're going to do, especially in the PHP tutorials, I'll be doing a lot of stuff with databases. So you're going to see a lot of stuff going on with databases in PHP, but this is the environment that I tend to work in. Also, if you've purchased the tutorials, because you'll notice each one of these tutorials you can purchase, because of the limitations of streaming on the web, my size for the tutorials is much smaller on the web than they are actually if you purchase. If you actually purchase the tutorial, they're 1280 by 720, which makes the screen very big, gives you a lot of real estate. You can see a lot of things going on at the same time. Plus, with every tutorial, each will have an exercise file which has copies of the example code. So instead of you having to type everything, you can actually just cut and paste it into your text editor and then start going through the demonstrations that I'm demonstrating. You'll also notice that in each lesson, the exercise we're particularly on will be at the top of the page. If I have actually more than one exercise in a lesson, which many of the lessons have multiple exercises, I'll actually just add additional lines to this, and we'll put exercise 2 above it, and so on and so forth. And you'll notice that each one of them is going to have a heading telling you which one we're currently looking at. And those are plain text files. So again, if you've purchased the tutorial, you'll actually have these exercise files in that folder, and it's in a structure, a folder structure that looks very similar to this. You'll see exercise files, and then you'll have a copy of the script that I used, and you'll actually have a copy of the movie itself in a 1280 by 720 format. Okay, so now that we've gone through that, I normally go through that on the first introduction for each series, just so everybody knows how things are going to proceed. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to make sure that you've got your MAMP server up and running. Your MAMP or your WAMP server should be up and running, because as we go through this demonstration, you're obviously going to put this on your web server so that we can test out what we're doing. I'm going to open up my browser. For this particular demonstration, I'm going to use Firefox. You'll notice I'm on my local host right there, and I've got no files inside there. So let's go ahead and bring up my text editor. I'm going to use Sublime Text 2 for this particular document. So let's go ahead and put in my code in my text editor so we can develop this brand new page that we just talked about. Let me go ahead and get rid of this. I don't think we need this right now, but I want you guys to see I normally keep this open when I'm actually doing real work, so that I can have my folder structure up and I can see where everything is in reference to my root directory of my websites. And as you go through more and more training with me, you'll see that we'll actually use that stuff as we're going on. But for this particular demonstration, like I told you, we're going to actually create our very first web page. So I'm going to go down here, and the first thing I want you to notice, I've opened it up with a doc type HTML. That's how we open up all our HTML5 documents. So I've opened it up with a doc type HTML. This, by the way, will become the template for all of our basic HTML documents that we're going to do throughout this exercise. All right, so we've got our doc type HTML. That's, by the way, doc type HTML is how we start all of our HTML5 documents. If you're familiar with the older versions of HTML, there was a whole lot of additional information that was up there in that header. It's no longer required. Right below that, you'll see my HTML, where I'm actually starting the HTML document itself. I'm telling it the language is English. And by the way, you'll notice I've got some comments in here, just saying what we're using this for. Then I go into my head section. Head is where we put our meta tags, as well as our title of the actual document itself. And this is where we link to our CSS spreadsheet or CSS styling sheets, to our script files. All that stuff happens in the head. As we walk through these exercises and tutorials, you're going to learn there's a lot of information that's very important in the head. None of this information, by the way, here and up, is displayed in the actual web page itself. This is all part of the head section of the HTML document. Let me go ahead and save this into our website real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this up into my website, and I actually have, my website has its own www directory. We're just going to call this our basic template.html. And if I refresh this, you should see our basic template come up now on our web server. And then I get into the body. Right after the head tag, I get into our body tags. You'll notice I've got my opening and closing body tags. I've got some H1, which are headings. We actually have 6 sizes of headings that you're going to learn as we go through these tutorials, H1 through H6. Then I've got a couple of paragraph tags, both opening and closing paragraph tags. And then I've got my closing body tag and my closing HTML tag. If I were to bring this page up in my browser, you'll notice that's all we see. All this information in the head section is not displayed on our page, except my actual title. Right here, that actually becomes, if you look on our tab, the basic HTML document structure. And actually, I probably should put HTML5 document structure. That's actually displayed. Let me refresh this page, and you'll notice it updates there. That's actually the page itself, both at the top of our window and in the tab. And then the information that we put into the body of the HTML document itself is actually displayed in our browser window. You'll notice the HTML1 or the H1 tags are the biggest headings that we have. If I were to make this an H2 tag, both opening and closing, you'll notice it goes down. These are, by the way, generic sizes. These are the standard sizes that's built into our browser, both that font and the display, the way they're displayed, both the margins, the padding, as you're going to learn as we start getting more and more into this, are based on the browser itself. As we start getting more into our development, you're going to see that I actually have what I call a CSS reset that puts everything back, so regardless of what browser I'm displaying this in, it always looks the same. But you can actually pause your video if you want to go ahead and type this stuff in. Let me go ahead and make this a little bit bigger so it's a little bit easier for you to read, because I know on the actual website itself some of this can get a little bit more difficult to read because it's smaller on the web. Keep in mind, again, if you purchase the tutorials, they're 1280 by 720. Plenty of video display area, plenty of real estate to see all the stuff that we're doing. So that's our basic HTML5 document. We're going to use this basic document in a lot of the tutorials going forward, so save it, because as you go into our next step, we're going to start adding to it so you can learn more and more about designing these pages. But as I said as we started out, you've actually created your very first HTML web page. This page would work on a website in your actual local host inside your web development platform. Right here, your WAMP server, we actually now have this real HTML document that's displaying. So I hope you enjoyed an introduction to HTML5. This concludes an introduction to HTML5, part of the HTML5 Essential Training Series. This is Mike King from On Target HTML5, and I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial.